mo'okuau hau for our cohort, with each element being steeped in Kona. As our cohort name suggests, Kahalona lava is depicted by the soaring Eva bird who graced us with their presence, the ability to see from a bird's eye view as if we were looking at a map. The outline of Hualalai places us upon her slopes, where Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa is located, and the location of the birth of our cohort. Upon her slopes, Kaumekeʻai, which holds an abundance of resources, is depicted by a rendition of a map of kuaiwi and crosswalls. At its base, a kuaiwi wall stands. The formation of Pohaku is an artistic amalgamation of two walls that we as a cohort learned of and touched. On the right side, the Pohaku shapes are those of a wall that we helped build with hui mau in Pa'awilo. On the left are the shapes of the Pohaku that are part of the Ke'eku Heiau in Kahalu'u. The joining of both of these walls symbolizes the joining of the future and the past. Our cohort's projects are reflected in this logo, the filling of the umeke'ai and the joining of the future and the past because of this beautiful location, Kahalu'u Kūāhewa on Hualalai.
Hallelujah. Can you go ahead and shift over to the next slide? So mahalo everybody. We got the really long introductory stuffs here, but now we're about to jump into the presentations themselves. But before we get to the haumana, we do want to say mahalo nui to all the ohana, all the community of not just Kahalu'u, but of Kona in general, for welcoming us in and sharing all of your ʻike with us. And we hope that we are sharing it back with you and back to these ainas in meaningful ways. And so, mahalo at Kahalu'u Manawai, Kamahela ni Pai, Auntie Kalani Ham, we want to mahalo Auntie Shirley, Kūāhewa Ho, at Halo Maluhia in Ke'e, wana mahalo Hana Taupu, Uncle Tava, Auntie Cheryl, Rio for watching over us, keeping that generator running when we needed it, to Helen mahalo nui for the mountain apples, and mahalo also to Manuela and Makana, our four-legged friends over there. Mahalo Auntie Cleo Pike, who's also part of our Papakahewa with the Kaliwaka Pa'akai Collective, and a long-time kupa of Kona and South Kona. And mahalo for sharing all your ʻike with us in our visit to Kahalu'u Kūāhewa with the collective. Mahalo Anne-Marie for coming out and sharing with us the experience of reconnecting to your ohana aina out there. And again, mahalo nui to ohana koho'one. You've all met Kekoa and Kim. Also mahalo to their kaikamahine, Hineli'i, Ka'onohi, Leleata. Happy birthday, Leleata. She turned 4 years old yesterday. And I tell you, I never met a more efficient catcher of crickets in my life. And now she has 4 years of experience in that. And she will do it in these fashionable yellow boots with rainbows painted on them with a doll in one hand, cricket in the other one. She gets skills. And mahalo also to their Lata. But yeah, that being said, now we'll move on to our haumana here and the order of their presentations. And so today, we're going to begin with first diving into one of the most important pilina between ourselves and Aina. And that will be through, excuse me, Kahina Hewitt, as she talks about different water sources and retention and distribution systems in Kahalu'u Kūāhewa. Following that, Kawai Souza will talk about the different ways in which these methods of cultivation can remain continuous and perpetual throughout generations, as she discusses her documentation of malakalo within a few kihapai in Kahalu'u Kūāhewa. And so we start with these because, of course, Wahi as a foundational pilina or building block that allows for the perpetuation of such things like that agriculture. And then when we have these kind of things in place, that allows us to do more advanced things, more specialized oihana, like the construction of heiau, these places that really ensnare, attract, contain, and disperse mana, right? These places that generate different insights and enlightenment for ourselves, for our people. And so Ka'ala Bertolin will be sharing about the heiau within Kahalu'u. And this is all amazing, amazing ʻike. And so it's just wonderful knowledge for us to learn, but it's all really useless if we don't ensure that it continues, right? And in what way? We need to make sure that it continues in a way that is maikai, that is right. And so ending our one of the presentations will be Kainani Merle, which she will be talking about aina-based education in Kahaluʻu, Kūāhewa, and the needs for maybe specific programs and even maybe changes to how education is conducted within our Department of Education system and in other types of education as well. And with that, we can go on to the next slide. As we say, this system is such a vast area. These are but 4 presentations ʻike accumulated and learned from this place that is really so vast that, as I said, the eyes cannot perceive the end of it. Across the physical system and even temporally, perhaps we will not be able to see how awesome and abundant these places can be for us in the future. But at least we can look to examples of how this stuff was in the past to guide us today and to answer questions of like why was such a system so vast? Like, how did it become established, right? Like, why and how could that happen? And to answer such questions about why these things were established, again, I will turn it over to Kahina to discuss why and its vital significance to such an aina here. Kahina, the floor is yours.
Auhea valeo ko, e nā hoa, nā kūpuna, nā keiki, a me nā ohana, e hoʻola ana I ka moʻomeheo Hawaiʻi, mai ka piʻi ana o Kanehua lani mai ke ala ula a kane, ma ka ʻaoʻao hikina o ka ʻaina kaulana o Kona. Kahie I ke maka ai ia hualalai, a me ka wahi o Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. A hiki loa I kona hui pū ana me kana loa ma ke kaimalino a o Kona. Aloha nui kākou. I am Kahina Hewitt, a graduate of Ke Kula o Ehunui Kaimalino, e Hawaiian Immersion School in South Kona, and I am from Holualoa, Kona. So I have been very excited to expand my ʻike and learn about the nearby ahupua'a of Kahaluʻu. This research project examines water sources, water distribution, and retention systems in Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. Ka waiola o Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa, a water inventory of Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa, Kona. The moku of Kona is known to be dry with no surface water or consistent running streams. However, Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa has water sources and water retention and distribution systems that were built to best accommodate cultivation and life in the Kona environment by using ethnohistorical research and contemporary maps to inventory and create a comprehensive list of Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa's water sources and water distribution systems of Auwai, Kuaiwi, and Punawai. We can strengthen and inform contemporary stewardship practices. Some basic knowledge on Vai is it has a lot of cultural significance in Hawaii, and it's vital to all aspects of life. I want to refer to the Olelo no Eau or Hawaiian proverb, He hue vaiola ke kanaka nā kane, which means people are Kane's living water gourd. Vai is vital to all living things in order to survive. This Hawaiian proverb compares humans to a gourd of water kept by Kane, one of our main akua. Kane is associated with life and fresh water. Ola I ka vai, water is life, and Kane is the keeper of both. This is an excerpt or a section of the chant He mele no Kane, and this chant shows the significance of Vai through a Hawaiian cultural lens. I specifically chose this section because it shows us how water imbues mana, water imbues life, and the pilina or the connection that Vai has with Kane and Kanaloa. So some Vai definitions and water source definitions is ua is rain, punawai, water spring, auwai is a ditch or canal, and kuaiwi are rock wall oriented upslope, downslope, used for water retention and to mark boundary lines. So now that we have some ʻike about Vai and its definitions and its cultural significance, I'd like to introduce you guys to this revered aina of Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. It is a profound traditional agricultural system in the moku of Kona in the Mauka region of Kahaluʻu. The vast 354 acres are now preserved by Bishop Estate Kamehameha Schools, and there have been archaeological surveys and ethnohistorical studies to document this aina. It was established by Kamehameha Ekahi, Ali'i, and Maka'ainana in 1812 and extensively cultivated with staple and supplemental foods. So now that you guys understand about Wai and Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa, I'd like to talk about some of my approaches in conducting my research project. My first method would be ethnohistorical research. And we as a hui examined published and unpublished materials, including technical reports and maps for information pertaining to Wai in Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. Examined historical maps for water sources and water retention and distribution systems within Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. We conducted field work like ground truthing, and ground truthing is using information that is available to us in maps and then going out on the aina and finding it. So in this photo, we're walking through kind of more of the thicker part of the forest. There's a lot of ivy trees, and our goal was to find a water feature that we had previously seen on a map. So in the photo, I'm wearing the Garmin GPS to track where we've been going in hopes to find this water feature. We did GPS documentation, like recording GPS points and tracks for our areas of study and including Wauhale waterhole and other features searched for during ground truthing. We did mapping, like using tape and compass baseline mapping techniques to record the features of Wauhale waterhole. And we conducted work days to establish stronger pilina with the aina of Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa, and it provided space for us to show our mahalo to the ohana kohoʻonei and to this aina for hosting us. And I'd like to explain a little bit more about some water distribution and retention systems in Kūāhewa, such as Wai. Wai is a stream for artificial irrigation, retention, and control. Wai have been found in the more saturated areas of the Kona field system and could have been used to control runoff and direct water to areas most in need and also help prevent soil erosion. Kuaiwi are rock walls that are multifunctional and a byproduct of clearing rocks from the land of new planting area. Kuaiwi run in the direction of Mauka to Makai, and specific kihapai, pauku, and mala are marked by kuaiwi, and then also sometimes cross walls running in the opposite direction. Some of the cross walls function as soil traps and retaining features, creating terrace-like areas to enhance planting. Kuaiwi can also function to move water downslope in a controlled manner, ensuring optimal distribution of the available runoff water. Now in Kona, there were specific planting methods used to help with water retention because of the lack of surface water and irrigation. So one of them being pu'e, and that's to plant in a mound. And in this photo at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa is uala being planted in wood chip or mulch mounds. Another planting method is makalua, and that is to plant in a pit or a hole. An important water source that is very significant at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa is water holes. And this is a source of wai found on maps and ethnohistorical research pertaining to Kahaluʻu. And so far, it is unknown whether these are puna wai wells or some other source of wai. Here is an interactive map. In the dark gray, there is kuaiwi. In the light gray, there's cross walls. The green represents planting rings. Blue lines represent wai, and the blue bubbles represent water holes. So when I press on the water hole on the kalamai, on the most makai side is Wauhale. And when we click on it, we can find a little bit more information about it. And so now that we know some of the distribution and retention systems for Wai, I really want to focus on water holes in Kūāhewa. And this is a table that I made with all the water holes that were depicted in a 1908 map by Baldwin. And some of their possible translations that I came up with by referring to the Hawaiian dictionary. Wauhale, inland region of houses. There's Waiapaea or Waiapoa. I've seen variations of how it was spelled. Lauhue, Kumumamaki, and Pulepule. Here is a photo of Wauhale waterhole. And we see some really cool features like how the waterhole actually has Wai in it. There's a pohaku pathway on the left side or Makai side of this place. On the farther side or the Kohala side is a dug, what seems to be a pit. And then there's also like an old metal pipe in the waterhole also. And Wauhale is depicted on a historical map from 1908. Its western edge has a pohaku walkway that lines the pond. And further research may yield information pertaining to the age of this waterhole, whether it may be historical or ancestral in construction, and whether it may be Punawai well or some other source of Wai. Here is a digitized map of Wauhale, and when we refer to this map legend, we can point out some of the features that we see. So on the pohaku pathway, some of the pohaku have been collapsed. The interior of the waterhole, where the pipe is located, and then also where it ends on the Makai side of Wauhale. And so while at Wauhale doing fieldwork, we did mapping that all of us interns got to practice doing. Here's our drawn map before digitizing. We took field photos of the features, and this pipe that was found in the waterhole could possibly be historic, but not ancestral. Perhaps this waterhole was being used for a long time as a source of Wai over generations, and the addition of this pipe could be an example of how the use of Wauhale could have evolved over time. Here's another interactive map, more focused on the water sources and retention systems. So of course, we have Kūāhewa in the dark gray. The blue lines is Wai. The orange is standing water. Blue bubbles is water holes. And then what's highlighted in the red is another water feature that I'm going to expand on. Here's the photo of the real life photo of what was highlighted in red on our map. And on a Reckman study, it was referred to as a bulldoze pond. And while ground truthing in an attempt to find Waiapoa waterhole, we encountered this larger pond noted on the Reckman map as bulldoze pond. And after a quick examination of this pond, yielded a possible pohaku alignment lining the western edge of this pond. The water of the pond was clear and not muddy, while at this wahi, we observed damselflies, dragonflies, io, and also pueo. So while conducting field work at this water source, we recorded GPS points and captured field photos from different angles. We found another possible source of Wai. This is a possible Wai in the picture above the bulldoze pond that was not depicted on the Reckman map and could be interconnected with another source of water. There is standing water that was depicted on the Reckman map, and it is also above the bulldoze pond. When we came across this pond, the water was clear and not muddy. And something we observed while at this wahi was damselflies. And to me, this is an indication that there are insects specific to Wai at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa because of the presence of many water sources. So to conclude, this research is contrasting to predominant discussions about Kona being dry and lack of irrigation, because obviously Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa has many amazing water sources, features, and retention and distribution systems. Further research can aid in clarifying if these may all be components of an irrigated agricultural system, which may be fairly novel within the context of the moku of Kona, which has been primarily discussed and understood as aina malo'o, drawing water primarily through rain and accumulated dew. my recommendations would be to conduct more studies and ethnohistorical research to identify and document possible ʻaui and water sources, including water holes, and to explore how these may function as components of an irrigated agricultural system. Some of my challenges and limitations was the duration of this internship does not suffice for the amount of research that should be conducted for this wahi pana. After using maps and reading studies, I was able to find general ʻike of ʻaui, Kūāhewa, and the names of water holes. Although a personal challenge while working from home, I was not able to find a lot of ethnohistorical research specific to water holes in Kahaluʻu, Kūāhewa, other than their names. So fieldwork and being on Aina was very valuable to me in conducting research for my project. Here are my reference cited. And I would like to mahalo my kumu, kaholana leva o ka umeke ai, Hulio Pa'a, Jesse and Kim Koho'ane, the Kona community, and the Aina of Kahalu'u Kūāhewa for guiding me on this research project. The Wahi Kūpuna internship has strengthened my academic journey and encouraged positive development for me as a haumana, a kanaka, and a kama'aina of Kona. I would like to pursue Wahi Kūpuna stewardship as a possible career path to positively contribute to the Lāhui Hawaiʻi. Mahalo no ko'oko ho'olohe ana mai. I would like to transition all of your guys' attention to my huapapa kawai. Mahalo.
All right, aloha no kākou, mahalo e kahina for that introduction. Mai nā halo na lava o ka ahiki ke kaimalino a o Kona, ano ai ka velina me ke aloha, aloha no kākou. O au no o ka wailani Suza, no honomaka'u kohala mai au. I'm currently an undergraduate student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, majoring in Hawaiian Studies and English. And this summer, I had the opportunity to work with Hulio Pa'a alongside Kahalu'u Kūāhewa to develop this research project, which is a documentation of the malakalo at Kahalu'u Kūāhewa. So just a quick introduction to this project. Like I said, during the course of the 2022 Wahi Kūpuna internship program, which took place in the Ahupua'a of Kahalu'u in South Kona, we documented 4 of the malakalo in the Kihapai Ho ʻike at Kahalu'u Kūāhewa. And the documentation roughly spanned the course of 2 weeks and consisted of using information gathered and recorded to create an overview map of the Kihapai Ho ʻike with the mala in it. So through documenting the malakalo in the Kihapai Ho ʻike at Kahalu'u Kūāhewa, stewards will be able to better understand, cultivate, and implement ancestral regenerative agriculture practices. So just a little bit of background information about our host site this summer. Depicted here on this map, which is interactive, and all of the maps that I'm going to be showing you guys today are interactive, so you can click on it and it'll show you a little bit more information. So here we have the moku of Hawaii Island depicted, and then highlighted over here is the moku of Kona, and then the ahupua'a of Kona, and then here over here, of course, in orange is the ahupua'a of Kahalu'u, where our research focused this summer. So Kūāhewa was once an abundant plantation that belonged to Kamehameha Ekahi, and Kahalu'u Kūāhewa was said to be so expansive that one could break or hawa their eyes by trying to look from one end of it to the other. So due to booming sandalwood trade in Hawaii, priority was given by Konohiki to the cultivation and export of sandalwood trees, which left Kahalu'u along with several other ahupua'a largely uncultivated. And so to remedy this, upon his return to Hawaii, Kamehameha Ekahi established the law that anyone who took 1 taro or 1 stalk of sugarcane must plant 1 cutting of the same in its place. And so Kamehameha's ko'oha resulted in an extensive agricultural field system known by the name of Kūāhewa being planted. So here on the left, we have depicted a portion of this field system and some of the site features at Kūāhewa. Very similar to my Ho'opapa Kahina's map, we have the Kūāiwi walls here in this reddish color, and then cross walls in orange, planting rings in green, and the ʻauai over here in blue. And so as of 2022, Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa is the largest known remaining portion of the Kona field system, which is a major agricultural zone known as ʻapaʻa that began with the rain at approximately 1,000 feet and extended up to about 3,000 feet. And so while the majority of Hawaiian agricultural systems utilize terraces, the Kona field system developed a unique system consisting of kuaiwi, which, like my hoʻopapa Kahina shared, were long rock walls that ran parallel to the slope of the mountain. And so here on this map, we have depicted a closer shot, zoomed in view of the field system on the previous slide, with current kihaupai being cultivated at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa, and kihaupai, as defined by Nahoa Lucas, are land divisions smaller than a pauku, usually a cultivated patch or garden, orchard, even a small farm, a small small field or farm. And so, kalamai. Here on the left, we have kihaupai ho ʻike, which is where our research focused in this semester, this summer. And then right next to it, we have kihaupai puʻepuʻe. And then right next to that, we have kihaupai nahelehele. And so the areas in between these divisions, or these kuaiwi, were planted with staple food crops like kalo and uala, and specific planting techniques such as puʻepuʻe or mounding, pa'eli or covering, and papukui or composting were developed to conserve water and maximize sustainable crop yield. And so before getting into methods and results, just wanted to give a little bit of background information about this term, ancestral regenerative agriculture and ancestral regenerative agriculture methods that we've been using. And this is something that we were hoping that the documentation of this malakalo will be able to aid and be used as a tool to help implement and further develop at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa, because as I'm going to talk about a little bit, these practices are definitely already being practiced at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. And so we wanted to go about defining it a little bit within the scope of this project. And so for the purposes of this project, I'm going to define regenerative agricultural practices as agricultural management systems that sustain and enhance natural biodiversity and ecosystem services. And this definition is kind of informed by a 2019 study, The Potential of Indigenous Agricultural Food Production Under Climate Change in Hawaiʻi by Natalie Kurashima, Lucas Fortini, and Tamara Tickton. And so further, ancestral regenerative agricultural practices refer to the highly diverse, place-based agricultural techniques and management systems practiced by our Kūpuna, developed from an intimate relationship with and innate understanding of what was needed in order to ensure the organic sustenance of aina. So kind of this idea of mahi'ai. And so the techniques described in the following tables provide specific examples of ancestral regenerative agricultural methods currently being practiced or of interest to be practiced at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. And so I won't read everything on these slides just for the sake of time and not droning on, but just to call them out really quick: makalua, mahakea, okupe, and then we have pa'eli, pu'epu'e, and papukui. And so getting into a little bit of our methods that we engaged with throughout the process of documenting these malakalo, I'm going to be separating it into two sections, which is our research methods and our fieldwork methods. So our due to the nature of this program and certain constraints that we have, like time or not having access to a computer or Wi-Fi 24/7, a lot of the ethnohistoric resources that were used to inform the background information of this project were collected prior to the start of this program. So with the sources that were pre-gathered from our wonderful Huliaʻopaʻa staff, I looked primarily through NUPEPA, I looked through LCA documents from the Kahaluʻu Ahupua'a, and a lot of mo'olelo provided in Ana Kalakepa's 2012 ethnohistoric study of Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. And so the information that were found in these sources provided a general background on the history of agriculture and agricultural practices in North Kona. And then from there, myself, along with my hoʻopapa, conducted several community interviews with kupaʻaina, or native residents of Kona, which including Anake Shirley Kohaihau, which is in this photo. If it wasn't blurry, she's pictured here in this photo. And so we asked her a little bit about growing up in Kona and if she could recall the kinds of mea kanu that they had growing in their yard, if any, and when or what or when they would harvest in order to feed and sustain their families. So, and then additionally, I reviewed some scholarly articles relating to regenerative agriculture to formulate a precise definition, which we just talked a little bit about. And then moving on into fieldwork methods and the physical documentation of these mala, we utilized several different methods. And so because our main goal was to create a sort of map of the area, we began by taking GPS coordinates at each mala, as well as the orientation of those coordinates. And then from there, we took length, width, and height when it was applicable, measurements of these mala. And so you'll notice when we move on to the next slide, when you click on the map, there's also certain mala have interior and exterior measurements, and this is due to the pohaku walls that surrounded particular mala, which are the mala leleaka and mala ka'onohiula. And so that's one of the constraints of our methods, which was, if you notice on the map, which is in the next slide, all of these mala appear rectangular or almost square shaped. And this is kind of due to the nature of the measurements we were taking, which were taken with tape measure and a compass versus, creating a perhaps more thorough like tape and compass map of each mala, which again was due largely in part to the lack of time. But hopefully the photo documentation on the next few slides will be able to remedy that and paint a better picture. And so here are the results. So here in this interactive map depicts an overview of the Kiha Paiho ʻike, which we have right here. And then with the 4 mala kalo as we documented it. So here on the bottom left in the yellow is mala leleaka. Moving up over here is in the green is mala ka'onohiula. At the top over here in pink is mala hineli'i. And to the side over here is mala lauai. And so if you notice when we click on it, it has some of the information that we recorded in our documentation, including measurements. And on the next slide, we have a rough scale drawing of the mala kalo in the Kiha Paiho ʻike. So kind of similar to the last slide, can see more precisely these measurements, interior and exterior measurements, and kind of get a reference for where the fence line was, which was a big point of reference for us in our documentation. And so here's a closer look at the mala that we documented and some information about all of the mala. And all of the following information was gathered from Jesse and Kim Koho'one. So this is mala leleaka. It can hold approximately 16 to 19 huli, which is about 4 to 6 varieties. And here's some of the information that we collected in our documentation. So the information, some of the information included on the maps from the previous slide. And then moving up, we have mala ka'onohiula. This mala can hold approximately 22 to 24 huli, which is about 4 varieties. And then moving up, we have mala lauai. This mala can hold approximately 26 huli, which is about 12 varieties. And this mala utilizes a makalua planting style, which we mentioned previously in the table slide, as well as a variant of the pakukui technique, which we also mentioned previously. And just wanted to highlight that a lot of the varieties currently planted in these mala kalo at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa are Native Hawaiian varieties. And then lastly, we have mala hineli'i. This mala also utilizes a variant of the pakukui planting technique. And this mala can hold approximately 20 huli, which is about 4 to 6 varieties. And so going back to some recommendations, like we mentioned, we had a lot of time constraints in this program, so unfortunately we weren't able to do everything that we wanted to do, but some of the next steps or recommendations for this project, kind of going back to Jesse and Kim's goals for this AINA, which were to be able to open up Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa as a space for the community, for ohana who might not have the AINA or space to grow their own mea ai. And so, like we mentioned previously with this idea of the umeke ai, in this case can refer to anything that feeds us. So while this project and these recommendations focus primarily on food production and security aspects, we just want to reiterate that having this communal space to feed your ohana, literally with food crops, will also help to nurture pilina with AINA, with our Kūpuna, and with ourselves. So some possible recommendations for continuing this project could be to document all malakalo and all current kihapai at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa, to document and analyze current ancestral regenerative agriculture methods being used, particularly in regard to soil health and regeneration, which is one of the main concerns at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa currently. Calculate current food production based on these documentations, which I believe is already kind of underway, and then calculate future crop capacity and food production based on these calculations. And so as I'm wrapping up, just wanted to give a quick mahalo to Huleʻau Pa'a, the wonderful staff at Huleʻau Pa'a, mahalo to our WKIP staff, mahalo noho papa Hawaiʻi, mahalo e kahalona lava o ka umeke ai, mahalo to my hoa papa, mahalo to the ohana kohoʻonei, and mahalo to the AINA of Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa for hosting us. And over here we just have some of my references cited. So mahalo nui kākou. Right now, turning it over to my hoʻopapa Ka'ala for her project. Mahalo.
Hi, aloha kākou. Mahalo kawai for that small introduction. Mahalo everyone for joining us today. Aloha, my name is Ka'ala Bertelman, no waimea Hawaiʻi maiau, and this is my ʻike, or my story map, Pai Pai Hoʻia Kapohaku. So by using ethnohistorical resources, maps, community ethnography to catalog the heiau in Kahalu'u can facilitate a greater understanding of the heiau's function and significance to practice and place. My project this summer regards the many heiau in Kahalu'u. I give a little catalog of heiau, their function, and the location of some of these structures. Being that we are working in Kahalu'u Mauka, in the agricultural field system of Kūāhewa, I wanted to point out the agricultural heiau while also giving attention to the many other heiau in this area. So some of the methods that I used while doing my research, I was able to look at historical maps, especially those of Kekahuna. His maps are very helpful. They had a lot of information on them and it gave more detail. Also reading through books and documents about heiau and some of the religious practices in Old Hawaiʻi, and looking at archaeological surveys that was done in Kahalu'u. I was able to look at the SHPD database, or the State Historical Preservation Database, and it was able to give more insight on some of the location of these heiau, and then also engaging in community interviews with people that have the experience of building heiau and ahu. So here we are on the moku of Hawaii, or Mokupuni of Hawaii, in the moku of Kona, on the leaves of Hualalai Mountain, sits the ahupua'a of Kahalu'u. Kahalu'u is a place of rich history and many stories. This aina lives on through the mo'olelo of the Kūpuna and the many descendants who continue to malama and perpetuate the ʻike of their ancestors and ohana. So I kind of just wanted to start off by giving a little explanation of what heiau are, just in case anyone is unfamiliar. So what are heiau? In Pukui's dictionary, she defines heiau as pre-Christian places of worship or shrines. Some heiau were elaborately constructed stone platforms, and others were simple earth terraces. Henry Kekahuna breaks down the word heiau and gives a definition based off of the words hei and the word au. Hei is to ensnare or to entangle, and au are currents or the life forces that vibrate in space. He states that the Hawaiian word heiau literally means the ensnare of life forces from the atmosphere. Kekahuna also mentions that some of these temples were places of learning and education, and that life and religion were one in the same activity in Old Hawaii. Kekahuna also categorizes heiau into different classes. So I'm just gonna list them in those different classes. So in our first class, we have the Luakini, Po'okanaka, and Waikawa heiau. These heiau were known to be more of the sacrificial heiau, usually dedicated to the Akuaku, who was the god of war and politics, amongst other things. But it wasn't permitted for anyone to just build these heiau. Usually the ali'i aimoku were the ones to build these heiau. And if you were ali'i of lower rank or a maka'ainana or a commoner that were trying to build a heiau like this, then you would be considered a rebel. Then in the second class, we have the ho'oulu'ai and the waiho heiau. These heiau were used more for cultivation of plant purposes, so like food, medicine, rain, and these were said to be more comfortable heiau. The cup weren't as strict. And then we have the haleo papa heiau. These heiau were usually for women, usually belonging to the Pi'o or Ni'o chiefesses, and it was for the good of the women and children. In our fourth class, we have unu and ipuolono. I wasn't able to find much about unu besides the fact that they're platform shrines. And in talking to Uncle Mahel and Ipai, he mentioned that unu could also be wood pieces or portable. Then the ipuolono were family shrines in the halemua. So the men had the responsibility of taking care of this ahu, and it wasn't like a normal hill, or not that I've read of at least. It was a ipu in the hale that they would put ai and i'a into to feed the akua. And I kind of elaborate more over here, but I'm gonna move on to ko'a and ku'ula. This is the fifth class, and these are fishing shrines and altars. Usually built near the shore, and the fishermen, of course, would tend to these pohaku or these ahu. And it was usually dedicated to the akua ku'ula kai and his wife Hina Pukui'a. But in this picture over here, this is a ku'ula that is actually in Kahalu'u still to this day. His name is Ulupalakua. There's some olelo of him being from Maui, but then there's ohana from Kahalu'u that said that he's from Kahalu'u. So it depends who you ask. And then this wasn't in any of Kekahuna's classes or categories, but I wanted to add this in because I think it's important. Ohakua Kane. So these were places of refuge for families from generation to generation. Usually were set upright in a shape of a pillar. And these pohaku or these ahu weren't limited to anyone. Every family and every countryman could build one or erect one. And they were for fertility overall, for the health of your ohana, for the health of the aina that you live on and the community that you live in. And I just wanted to note that these heiau were built to increase and perpetuate the growth of livestock, fisheries, crops, and other plants of value that they used to make clothes and tools. Heiau were also built in alignment with what the land and people needed at that time. So maybe if your crops weren't doing good, there's a drought, there hasn't been much rain, maybe you would build a a ho'olu'ai or a waihau heo. And I know there has been some mo'olelo of incidences where it's the opposite way. Maybe you need some help in those things, and Akua would reach out to you. Yeah. And then over here, I kind of just wanted to give a little background of heo and the history of heo, more specifically the cause of the decline in use of heo in Hawaii. So I talk about the transition from Aikapu into Ainoa after the death of Kamehameha Ekahi in 1819. I give a little summary of that over here, but if you want to know more details about this information, I connected a link so you can click on this blue button to know more about what the Aikapu is. And then I summarize a little bit more down here about the breaking of the Aikapu and the Battle of Kuamo'o and that whole transition. But again, there's 2 links down here that you can click on if you would like to find more information on the breaking of the Aikapu and then the Battle of Kuamo'o. But we see the outcome of this event today. Many of the heo that I will be talking about are now in dire condition and haven't been touched since 1819, when the command was given by Liholiho to burn all heo and ki'i within the islands of Hawaii. We see examples of this in Kahalu'u, of how these sacred sites were disregarded in the making of hotels, condos, and roads. The families of Kahalu'u and the community of Kahalu'u had enough of this. As you can tell in this picture, there was a hotel that was built on multiple sacred sites, but they were able to kind of, like Kepo'o was saying earlier, get them out of there. He also mentioned that Auntie Kalani Ham states that we made the impossible possible. So yeah, they were able to get rid of the hotel. It was the old Kona Lagoon Hotel, and it was demolished, broken down, everything was taken out of there. And then afterwards, they were able to restore and rebuild these heo, Ke'eku and Hapaiali'i and Makole'a. There's another heo that they are in the process of restoring. It's to the left over here. You can't see it in the picture, but that one is called Kapuanoni heo. So I kind of just wanted to give a little insight of some of the location on these heo using the Shipti database. So here's the Ahupua'a of Kahalu'u, and as you can tell, most of the heo that I will be talking about are in this Makai portion. So here we have on the top right here is Hapaiali'i. I kind of give a little, I break down the words again, and I give a little definition to the words that I break down. In knowing some of their definition, I think it can help point in the direction of what these heo were used for. So this is Hapaiali'i above over here. Ke'eku is down here. Ke'eku is known to be one of the more famous luakini heo, said to have been built by Lanoika Makahiki, and where Kamalala Valu was sacrificed. But it also depends who you talk to, because that information is from Stokes. And then in looking at Throne's research, he says that Kamehameha was the builder of this heo. So it depends. Then we have Halela'au heo, known to be an agriculture heo. Ku'emanu heo, known as a surfing heo. This is Makole'a heo, and it's said to have been the place where Lanoika Makahiki didn't sacrifice Kamalala Valu, but his body was put to rest over there or burned over there. It was said that Kapulani was condemned to death by Lanoika Makahiki on this heo as well, and said to be sacrificed the next morning, but Lono's niece actually set him free, so he made his escape to Ka'u, and that never happened. And then there's also this story of a little summary of this story. Kepa Ka'ili'ula and Makole'a heo, or Makole'a, she was a chiefess from Kahalu'u. And a lot of the names in this story now relate to the names of the land in the Kona area. And then we have Ka'i'o'ena heo, also known as Kiahi'olo heo, and this is also an agriculture heo who is said to be built by Lanoika Makahiki. And as you can tell, it sits right here on the border of Kahalu'u and Ke'aho. This is Pa'o Umi Heiau, known to be an agriculture heiau and said to be built by Umi Aliloa. And then this is Papakoholua heiau. I wasn't able to find much information on this heiau, but I do have a theory that this could be a heiau that I've been looking for, but it's just been, I've just been looking at another name. So this is just my theory. It's not anyone else's theory, just is my mana'o, and I think it would be a good project to look more into. But by looking at Kekahuna's map and the Shipti database, I was able to make some comparisons while using Pa'o Umi as a reference point. So here we have Pa'o Umi in the corner. This is Kekahuna's map. And below it, we have Ke'eku heiau. Ke'eku heiau kalamai. And then if we look at the Shipti database map, this is Pa'o Umi and this is Papakoholua heiau, which seem to be in the same kind of shape and form, which is kind of why I made that assumption. But yeah, I think it would be kind of cool to look more into this and do more research about these heiau. This is a map from Kekahuna, like I said, very detailed, of what we know today of Kahalu'u Manawai. So these are the heiau that I kind of were previously talking about. Ke'eku heiau, Hapaiali'i over here, Kapua Noni, Pu'emanu's right here, and this is Makole'a. And then that Ku'ula rock that I was pointing out earlier, Ulupalakua, this is where he used to sit. But now I'm thinking more in this area now. He was kind of moved around. A couple other heiau that I would like to mention is Kapua Noni heiau, Ohi Amukumuku heiau, Kamau'ai heiau, which isn't a heiau in Kahalu'u. This heiau is actually in Ho, which is the Ahupua'a south of Kahalu'u. But I wanted to mention it because this heiau was connected to the introduction and the propagation of vegetables here in Hawaiʻi. And then also Ke'eku heiau, said to have been built by Alapa'i, and it's also known to be an agriculture heiau. So like I kind of said earlier, there's not a lot of information on these heiau in Hawaii due to everything that's happened in the history. These spaces were poorly or not at all tended to, which made it harder for people like Kekahuna, Stokes, and Thrum to gain more insight and information on while they were going around and doing their surveys in the early 1900s. This is the reason for little to no information found on some of these heiau during my limited time of research as well. So some of the heiau that the only thing I really found on them were their names was Lahai heiau, which is in this map right here. Hanakalawai'a heiau, Hanakalau'ai heiau, Kūāhewa heiau, and Haleau Kane. And then I just kind of wanted to point out the ag heiaus that I found in Kahalu'u. So there is Halela'au heiau, Kapua Noni heiau, Pa'o Umi heiau, Ke'eku heiau, Hanakalau'ai heiau, Ka'io'ena or Kiahiolo, and then Kamau'ai, which is in Keoho. I wasn't able to find as much information as I wanted to on these agriculture heiau. Like I said, the history and the hardship of them trying to find all of these things didn't make it easy for me. But yeah, I was able to talk to some people in the community that have done work with heiau, and in interviewing them, they were able to give us a little bit of guidance in building heiau or ahu and creating these sacred spaces for our akua. So I interviewed Uncle Mahealani Pai. These are just some of the things that he said, but one of the things that stood out to me was one of the quotes that he said was, "Be ready and open to receive any ho'ailona if you ask. If you ask, be ready to see what's coming." I think this is important because I believe in building these things and intending to these spaces. We should be really conscious of what we're doing and what we're thinking and how we're feeling. Yeah, and then Auntie Ka'u, I got to interview Auntie Ka'ulani Manuai. This is also some of the things that she said, but one of the things that stood out to me was it's about everything outside of you. The pahu hopu is mauliola. And if you don't have that in the center, then nothing is going to stand. So for my next steps, I wanted to go into depth more about agriculture heiau. So trying to interview people that have more knowledge about ag heiau. Auntie Kaiulani said that she has friends and she's gonna try and connect me with them. So that's a cool next step that I am hoping will happen. Also doing more ethnohistorical research, looking through more unpublished and published materials for more information, and trying to find more oral history interviews with Kūpuna and Kama'aina from back in the day. In conclusion, I was able to gather as much information as I could regarding the different heiau listed above. Through looking at maps, at historical documents and archaeological surveys, and from talking to experienced Kanaka in this field, I was able to lay out a little bit of history, a little bit about the different categories of heiau, a catalog of most of the heiau in Kahalu'u, and a little bit of insight and advice when trying to restore or build heiau or ahu. Lastly, I just wanted to mahalo the Wahi Kūpuna Internship Program and Julia Pa'a for giving us this opportunity to see a little glimpse of what it's like working in the cultural resource management field. I wanted to also mahalo my kumu and my ho'apapa for making this internship a good experience and for helping with the heavy load of information given to us within these 5 weeks. Mahalo to the Kaho'one Ohana for welcoming us into your space and welcoming us on to the aina that they've been tending to and malamaing. Mahalo to the aina ʻike and Halo Malukuia and Uncle Tava's Ohana for hosting us and giving us shelter over the 3 weeks that we were camping. And I wanted to give my last mahalo to the aina of Kahalu'u, but more specifically the aina of Kūāhewa. Kalame, for inspiring us in the many ways and allowing us this opportunity to come together and to learn more about the history of this aina and to witness some of the new stories that this aina is portraying today. So mahalo. I will be passing it over to my ho'apapa, Kainani. Ooh.
Mahalo, Ka'ala. So as we get started here, I'm going to ask you to just take a minute because I'm going to be sharing something. And if you are in a safe place and you are comfortable, please feel free to close your eyes. And listen to the sounds of Wahale. The sound you're hearing in the background is as close to what our ancestors may have heard long ago. So I'm just going to be quiet for a minute and let you listen. At this point in our ʻike, you've heard about the content of these internships, the content about why these topics are interesting facts and important to the future of Kanaka in singular ways. Our Vai availability, food sovereignty, the mala, the facts about the past, and the actions of our internship. Now, I'd like you to mentally take a step back from these topics to look at the context that Kūāhewa will provide. My project is just a preliminary findings, as I will be continuing this project through the rest of the semester. And it's about the potential impact that Kahalu'u Kūāhewa can have on aina-based education in West Hawaii. My family has been in Kalahiki. My name is Kainani Merrill, and my family has been in Kalahiki for many, many years, as you can see from the photo in the middle. From 1916, my family has been in Ho'okana, and before that, all over the state, fishing, subsistence living, all of that. Now let's take a look as why it is important to learn certain subjects. let's start with my least favorite subject, math. Now, don't let your eyes glaze over. I promise I won't make you solve anything. Math, taught well, trains the brain to solve problems one step at a time. Logic. So why would it be important at Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa? Well, let's look at why. Knowing where the water ponds and getting that water to mala will help plants get the vibe that they need. And that sounds pretty logical to me. Science, the scientific method. Kanaka know that as kilo kilo, which made our Kūpuna wise in the ways of place, with deeply seated knowledge of one's home environment being the trademark of wise Kanaka. By kilo kiloing, observing our Kūpuna and watching as the Kūpuna watch their kalo grow, they practiced things that the Western world calls agroforestry, composting, fallow fields. And this was all ways to enhance the aina, their own mala, and grow from their failures. Language, any language, every language. It shapes the way that our brain contextualizes the world around us. Communication, connection, written, spoken, hallucinating while looking at ground up chemicals laid into patterns on dried up, smoothed out wood chips or liquefied dinosaur bones, metals, and plants. In all these ways, humans recognize patterns in sound, in shapes, and create meaning. We think critically about these sounds and shapes and what they mean to us. They entrain the minds of those we speak to, write to, and write about, and in this way, pass down ʻike and knowledge. Kumu Pereira coined the term me'iwi mo'o kaulaleo, or literary devices. These devices are taught in every high school English class, imagery, personification, and many more. But did you also know that they are practiced in Hawaiian oratory and that they have names in Hawaiian? Kohu, ho'okanaka. Why aren't we including these in our English classes? Something that I've noticed about being in college is that in a seemingly magical way, suddenly context matters. I have a 14-year-old son, and he asks every year in almost every class, why? Why this, why that? I'll never use it. I don't need to know how fast the train is moving and when it will get there. He isn't wrong. In his first week of school this week, I've heard why more times than I can count, and it's driving me absolutely bonkers. If my son is studying astronomy and history, and his class was to take a field trip to Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa, and the teacher posed the following question: if we want to harvest a mala to celebrate Makahiki and the rising of the Pleiades, when would we need to plant X type of kalo if X kalo grows at the rate of a growth rate of Z? To him, that might be a lot more appealing than trying to figure out how fast the train is moving and when it's going to get to point A to point B, but it's the same information. And if he was actually celebrating it for Makahiki and he was bringing home that kalo, he'd probably care a whole lot more because he knows I love kalo. The current school system rewards content over context, with standardized tests and sterile environments being the norm. Yet in rural Kona, there is an option for more, to give context to kids and help overwork underpaid and under-supported educators. I notice this because I am educator adjacent. I'm currently an IT tech at an intermediate school, and I'm aware of the vagaries and revolving door that is our education system and its policies. I'm also, as I said before, the mother of a 14-year-old boy who is aware of the historical systemic racism of this system, thanks to my current education status, and at an age where he is willing to fearlessly fight a system that does not reflect Kanaka epistemology and ontology. This internship has created awareness. Please be aware that I am constrained by time. There's only been 5 weeks of this internship so far, and this presentation is only the preliminary findings, and the rest of the fall semester will be used to continue. So my sample size is rather manini. I asked the current caretakers of Kūāhewa what they would like to see as the future. Their answers spoke of caring deeply, not only for the Aina itself, but also for the community at large. We want to be able to provide these opportunities to our babies, our keiki, as well as the kupuna who are still constantly trying to learn something. Kim and Kikoa have done an admirable job of creating space at Kūāhewa and sharing with the community the ways in which they saw available to them. Their use of social media has helped to increase the visitor metrics, but how can this be improved? My methods included community ethnographical interviews with both Aina-based educators, DOE educators, and community members, as well as being informed by various dissertations and published materials. I interviewed one of my favorite people in the world and my stepmother. And she's an educator here within the West Hawaii community. I've listened to her gripe about her lack of opportunity for her students, a lack of connection between the keiki and the curriculum, as well as someone who functioned as a mentor to me. When I asked her about the challenges she faces in the classroom, she listed a few of the following things. One of the main challenges for us is that we are given a requirement to teach 7th grade social studies, but there's no curriculum. They just say, oh, teach it here. This is all the things you have to learn. But no, there's no books for this. There's no curriculum. She also said that the connection, the students' understanding of what they already know and what they have outside can be connected in a meaningful way to academics and the real world. Her first comment about the lack of curriculum gave me a kernel of an idea, one that has been nagging at me since I realized just how many teachers are not Kanaka, not local, and sometimes shipped in from the US to specifically fill the need for the teachers in Hawaii schools. And a metric pulled directly from the HSTA, the Hawaii State Teachers Association. During the 2018-2019 school year, Hawaii classrooms had more than 1,000 emergency hires and long-term substitutes to cover vacancies because the teacher shortage is so severe. And in an older article based on a report from the DOE regarding their 2016-2017 hiring practices, the DOE hired 1,380 new teachers. 45% of those hires completed a state-approved teacher education program from an out-of-state college, meaning they had to come here to get hired, whereas 28% went through an in-state program. To break that down, out of 1,380 teachers, only approximately 386 of them were from Hawaii and had spent any time in Hawaii, while 621 are educated out of state. So how are these out-of-state teachers supposed to be aware that our keiki function better in Aina-based education settings? And how would these outsiders be aware of where to find amazing resources and the curriculum that other organizations have already put together? They can't, they don't. This knowledge led to the idea that Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa, with its fantastically central location, is a perfect resource for the West Hawaii public education complex. On the screen, you'll see this little red mark right here. That is the location of Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. Surrounding it with all these little dark dots are the various schools, and everything within this oval is within a 30-minute drive or less from Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. That's more than 10 schools. All of them are listed on the left side. If Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa could create a variety of curriculum, it could be a central resource for our educators. Also within the West Hawaii complex, which you'll see in orange here, there are a few other schools, and all of these schools are within a 2-hour drive of Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa. But organization is key. What would be the best way for these educators to know about a resource like Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa? And how would they want that information given to them? I asked Celia. Would they want it by the standards, the grade level requirements? What would it be? In this long quote, you can see that she names a couple things: theme and content, as well as cross-curricular connections. And that those things would be very helpful in curriculum. But what is a theme? So these are some themes that in your own time in the classroom, you may recognize: mahiʻi and agriculture, biology, genetics, history and religion and astronomy, water cycles and ecosystems. By organizing things by theme, it would allow teachers to find their own way across the site to any resource, a database for teachers to learn how Aina could enhance the connection, content, and context for their pupils. Right now, the DOE has two large initiatives: problem-based learning and next generation science standards. Problem-based learning is a student-centered approach in which students learn about a subject by working in groups to solve open-ended problems. And the problem is what drives the motivation and the learning. So rather than teaching relevant material and subsequently having students apply that knowledge to solve problems, the problem is presented first. Problem-based learning assignments can be short, or they can be more involved, or they can take a whole semester. And it's often group-oriented, so it's beneficial to set aside time in the classroom to let students engage with the projects. And next generation science standards explore connections between various domains of science, including physical science, life science, earth and space, as well as engineering. Now, these sound a lot like the internship that we did. And these are some problems that our keiki face today, as well as our community. All of these are issues that we face every day. Example lessons. So what would the theme be for the lesson? Well, after water cycles, geology, hydrology, history, after learning the basics, they could come to Kūāhewa to visit the interpretive trails, the makalua, and see how the kuaiwi are situated. We could pose questions, such as, how are the kuaiwi and ʻaoai taking advantage of the Wahi system and the natural geology? We give the haumana content, helping them to make the connection to context between the classroom and the natural world. And how would you teach math? Well, everybody's got to learn geology, geometry, measuring, algebra, word problems. You could measure the circumference of a mala, triangulate the curve of a mala, estimate the maximum amount of water in an ʻaoai, and how much rain would be too much rain. Learning the metric system in all these ways, these are things we honestly did while we were out there. While perhaps it wasn't set up this way, this internship has been problem-based learning in action. We each kind of chose our own problems, from food sovereignty to Wahi management and the past and how it pertains to the future. And we had to learn and measure and spend out time outside of the classroom and spend a lot of time researching to be able to do these presentations and our future papers. And how else would we get this information out there? If we get these example curriculums up online and these resources up for teachers, how would they know? Well, there's always professional development opportunities, as well as going into the classrooms with the kids. Because I know at certain elementary schools, they have taken away teachers' ability to take their students out of the classroom for music and other things like that. And they have taken away planning periods. So going into the classroom and giving teachers that time to be able to do their own thing and organize their own stuff would be hugely beneficial to educators. And if nothing else, get their thanks and move the kids towards knowing this information that they could apply at Kūāhewa towards their problems that they came up with, as well as social media. Social media is a fantastic tool for getting the message out there. For this project and the culmination of this project, I will be putting together a plan to go along with the content for each lesson that they learn or could learn and the teachers could apply in their classrooms. My recommendations. So I asked Celia, what would she like if she's going to be taking advantage of someplace like Kahaluʻu Kūāhewa? What are the things that she would love to see there? And to quote her, she said, it would be really exciting to do, a true overnight because we're so remote to everybody except for Pa'awilo Landing. It would be if we go somewhere, it would be working, almost like once we get out there, it's almost half a day and then staying the night and then working the next day and maybe even coming back after 2 nights. Facilities like campgrounds and composting toilets would allow for programs such as spring and summer camps that target demographics that are underserved. ADA accessible boardwalks so that Kūpuna as well as Keiki could visit. Because as Kim and Jesse mentioned, their dreams is that this is a learning center for everyone, as well as halaus and permanent structures, because it does rain up there. That is one of the ways that it gets its way. And if I was just dreaming about the possible programming that could happen up there, there's always Kilo and science-based spring and summer programs for Keiki. Maybe even Aina sustainability after school clubs to get kids out of the classroom after school and actually onto the land, as well as dealing with programming for underserved communities, programming for Kane and their Keiki together, perhaps an ancestral planting program for fathers, grandfathers, and their Keikis to learn mahi'ai that they can do at home or contribute to ohana plantings to feed their families, as well as LARPing camps. And if you don't know what LARPing is, it's live action role play. As it's been proven time and time again, play is integral to children's ability to learn. But a lot of the times, kids are pretending what they see in the media, and that does not reflect Kanaka epistemology and ontology. So if we create camps where kids can choose to be people from our past with storylines that emphasize our values, it'll be a little more fun and something different than what they see in school and on TV. I'd like to mahalo the Aina and our Kūpuna for leaving these structures here for us. By doing that, they allow for places to teach for the future. So hopefully the haumana have no age. It can be babies, it can be keikis, it can be Kūpuna, and anyone that wants to learn, because that is how our ancestors perpetuated knowledge. And of course, there's all the various references. Mahalo for staying all the way to the end for my presentation. I appreciate it.
Mahalo nui and haumana. And yeah, mahalo everybody for attending our Ho ʻike here. We're gonna go over to questions and answers really quick first, but I guess Amber, so we have slides all over the place. If you could bring up the last slide on the Canva deck. So before we jump into our question and answers, and mahalo to all of you for being engaged and for asking your questions in the chat. We just want to offer a few more mahalos here. At the beginning, we start off by thanking all of our ohana and community members within Kahaluʻu and within Kona, and so before we jump into the questions, we do want to say mahalo nui also to our collaborators and to our sponsors. So mahalo Pennsylvania Greenwell Ethnobotanical Garden and their executive director, Kim Kūāhewa, present with us today. Mahalo for providing a nice space for us to have Wi-Fi. Again, you heard this was one of the challenges is access to Wi-Fi, especially during our in-person weeks. And so we were able to do that there at Amy Greenwell. So mahalo nui, Brian and Ryder for showing us around at Kahaluʻu. I end up taken care of by them at the Liliwo Kalani Trust. Kamehameha Schools, mahalo for your ongoing support of this program for the past 13 years. And individually, would like to also mahalo BJ, Dr. Nelly Kurashima, Billy, and Trevor Dord. Most of them are in attendance with us today. So mahalo for this whole ʻike and for engaging with our homeland as well and providing your own individual insights into this field to live and your own research as well. We have many members of the Kahaluʻu Collective here during this whole ʻike. Mahalo to each of you, and so many of them had visited with our homeland and talked story with them. So mahalo nui, mahalo to hui mau, for hui malama ke alo nili in Hamakua. So Dr. Noel Poroto, Haley Kaili who Okoko and Bronson for talking story with us and sharing with their challenges and their successes and engaging in restoration in a little bit different kind aina than what we see in Kahaluʻu. Kūāhewa. Also present here today for talking story with the Homana as well as Anakalaka Mali. Dr. Kawabad, Kathy Kavelu as well, talking story with them. Dr. Michael Grace for visiting us on the aina. Madam, mahalo for you to talk for us in the background, and also for talking story with our Homana about maps. Kahiahi, mahalo for sharing about ethnohistorical research. Lilia, Marion is to thank for teaching the Homana how to put together these amazing story maps as you've seen. So she flew in to train them on them. Mahalo Lilia. I also want to thank Kamuela Plunkett, Yolani Kabuhane, and also Aloha Yo, see you online. And Pulama Lima, the three of them were able to talk story with the Homana to share about what it's like to be a kanaka in the field today. And also mahalo to our previous cohort, Iwi Kuamo'o, 2018, in South Kona, and especially to Leilani and Kau'i for talking story with them. But yeah, with that, I just want to say mahalo to each of you. Again, for attending here, we have some time for questions and answers. I know we went a little bit, we're 6 minutes over the scheduled time as you've seen on the flyer. I'll take responsibility for that. And like I tell the Homana, whenever I perceive them messing up or whatever, then I give them minus points. So minus points for Kipo on the time here. But if you would like to stick around and ask questions, then please feel free to do so. We have some that came up in the chat already, so we will start by addressing some of those. So, all right, it's time for Homana. Get ready. Just kidding. And well, actually, before that, again, we get one more round of applause for each of our Homana for Kahalona level. For all your amazing work in the Homana. Very impressive and inspiring. So, first question here is for Kahina Hewitt, and this question comes from Natalie Kuroshima. She says, mahalo e Kahina. In your research on these Wahi features, have you found any Olelo Hawaiʻi terms that reference this type of system that might not fit into the Inoa Aina Malo'o, but also not Aina Wahi? So have you seen anything that might kind of place it, I guess, within that spectrum of what has been classified as a binary of wet versus dry agriculture?
Mahalo, Natalie, for your no. Sadly, I do not know of an Olelo Hawaiʻi term yet to describe the aina of Kahaluʻu, Kūāhewa, and the type of water sources, but I agree, it doesn't really fit into aina malo'o, where all of the water distribution, retention systems, and these water holes, although since there's no kahawai, I'm not sure if it would be considered aina vai either. But as I further my research and over the course of this upcoming school semester, I think that would be something cool for me to look into. So mahalo, Natalie.